Hi 7am, it's me, Miss Hayden, and I've just had a literature lesson with your class, and there's a few new concepts I need to discuss with you, so let's get ready. Okay, so the first thing we did was we had a look at this novel overview, and as you can see, there are 4 criteria, and we went through each one. So, first things first, you are looking at the novel I Am David. So we're going to keep referring back to that novel. So if we have a look at the setting of I Am David, we need to understand that it begins in one particular place and then it travels over many different places. Because, as you know, I asked you to find a map of Europe and stick it in. And David starts his story in a concentration camp, and then he proceeds to travel across Europe, including Greece, Italy, Switzerland, Denmark, many countries. So in terms of setting, this novel begins in a concentration camp and then moves across Europe. So on your worksheet, you'd be writing, the novel begins in a concentration camp. Thereafter, David travels across Europe. Because we couldn't list all the countries. He's been through so many countries and he might not even have mentioned a particular country in the novel. Right, you with me? Then number 2 was characters. So there are a whole lot of characters in this novel, but the thing is, a lot of them are minor characters, meaning that they're not entirely important. They are just part of the story. They're not a main character. So if we're looking at our characters, our most important character is obviously David. And then by the end of the novel, because by now you finished it, we meet his mother, Edith. So David, Edith, and Sophie Bang, who introduces him to his mother's story. So you're moving along through the novel and you find that these are the most important characters. And then the 4th most important character is also Maria. Okay, we know David saves her from a shed fire. And then he stays with her family for a while. And then if we look at the minor characters, we've got the man. Okay, he plays a very important role in the beginning, but after David escapes the camp, he very rarely refers to him. He doesn't play a huge role in the rest of the story. So we've got the man, you've got Johannes, David's friend from the camp. You've got Alice and Donald, the man who David helped to find his glasses. There's a little bit of back and forth there. There's the Italian soldier who helps David on the ship. There's the baker who gives David some food. There's also the American couple who David helps to get petrol. There's the rest of Maria's family, so her mother and her father. I know her mother's name is Elsa. Yes, I know, Elsa. And the one brother is Carlo, and the other one is Andrea. And then moving forward, you also meet Angelo, who is a lorry driver who gives David a lift. So you can tell there's a whole lot of characters happening. But if we stick to our main characters, David, Edith, Sophie, and Maria, the story centers more around them. So under characters, we could list those 4. And then in terms of themes, there are some themes that are very important. So the first one is survival. Now, you know that this entire novel is about David surviving outside of that concentration camp on his own as he travels across Europe. He encounters many obstacles and he overcomes them in order to survive. So it's survival. The second one is freedom. This novel is about David getting and keeping, so attaining his freedom. This entire novel is David wondering, will I get caught? Won't I? Am I going back to the camp? Back and forth. And so yeah, freedom becomes very important to David and to the novel because it is the entire reason David escaped the camp was to get that freedom. And then he decides he wants to keep it and live in a free country. Right, and then the third and final one is religion. So it's normally quite controversial to talk about religion. You don't talk about it so much, but in this novel, this particular novel right here, David deals a lot with the religion Christianity, because he goes back and forth between who he should believe in, and then he decides on Christianity, and he keeps praying, and he keeps speaking to God, and he keeps bargaining. I want to say bargaining, because he says, he says to God, if I do this, please help me keep my freedom. If I do that, etc., etc., etc. Right, so those are our themes. And now we're going to go on to the very last point. And then the last item on your overview here is narration. Now, narration is not something we've looked at before. So there's this little worksheet, okay? And this little worksheet tells me about the types of narration. So, as you know, a narrator is someone who tells a story. And narration is defined as the act of telling a story. Now, in drama, we use narrators all the time. They're the person who is giving us all the background information, the person who is telling us what characters are doing and why. So, it's a point of view from which the story is told. It can also be seen as the voiceover. In a lot of movies, there's a voiceover and they tell us what's happening or what has happened. And those are our narrators. So, there are 3 types of narration. And they're very simple to remember. First person narration, second person narration, and third person narration. Simple, straightforward. They each have their own ideas. So we're going to be looking at them. So, first person narration is the easiest one to identify, because it is when a character is telling a story. So, it feels personal because the character is speaking directly to you as the reader. And you as the reader, you know how the character feels and how the character sees what is happening and how the character is feeling when things are happening. Because the character and our narrator and our author, we all see the words I, me, and we. So our first person narration basically can be located when we hear a character saying, I sat at the table, and then I got up because I was hungry, and then my food was warmed up in the microwave, so I sat down and I ate it. That is your first person narration. The character is telling the story. Then we move on to second person narration. Now, second person narration we don't normally see in literature. It's very few and far between, because it's actually quite a difficult type of narration to write, because this is where the narrator is telling the story, and the story is from the onlooker's point of view. So you, as the reader, become the narrator. You, as the reader, feel like you are a character in the story. And the words you would be looking out for would be words like you, your, and yours. So it would feel as if you are taking on the role of the character. You came and sat next to me. You started talking to me. Your phone started to ring. Okay? So it is quite a difficult one to write, because it's a strange perspective. You don't know what your reader's like. So your reader might not enjoy that kind of narration, taking on the role of a character. And then the last one is third person narration. So now in third person narration, there's also an external narrator, and they tell the story and they speak about the characters, because the narrator is not directly involved in the story. The narrator is only giving a rundown. They are telling you what has happened. Now, the thing about third person narration is the narrator can take on many different characters. So with first person narration, your narrator takes on one specific character, and we only hear about that character. Whereas with third person narration, you see lots of different characters. So for example, if we're looking at a group of friends. Okay, we have Sarah, Jen, and Mandy, right? So Sarah, in the first chapter, we're looking at what Sarah thinks, and then we jump to chapter 2 and we get Jen's ideas, and then in chapter 3 we come back to Sarah, and chapter 4 is about Mandy. So in third person narration, we're jumping from character to character. Okay, so our author, our writer, the person who writes the novel, would be using words like he, she, it, they, and them, or would be using the characters' names. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to read page. So as you can see, I've got my eye on David, and I'm looking at chapter 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the first little paragraph. I'm not going to read the entire page. So, chapter 1. David lay quite still in the darkness, listening to the men's lower muttering. But this evening, he was aware of their voices only as a vague, meaningless noise in the distance, and he paid no attention to what they were saying. Now, if we look at this, and we look at our types of narration, in that first paragraph, you can already rule out second person narration because there's no you, there's no your, and while we are reading, it doesn't sound as if we are taking on the role of a character in the story. So that leaves us with first person and third person narration. Now, if we look at first person narration, David would be telling the story and he would be saying, I lay quite still in the darkness, listening to the men's lower muttering. But this evening, I was aware. Whereas in the novel, he's actually saying, the narrator is actually saying, David lay quite still. He was aware. He paid no attention. So there's no I, there's no me, and there's no we. So we can rule out first person narration. This novel in particular, it doesn't really deal with David's thoughts and feelings. It also jumps to other characters' points of view. I mean, we see him eavesdropping on the conversation between the mom and the dad, Maria's family. And so it's not really first person, it's more third person narration. So we are looking at an external narrator because it says, David lay quite still. They're using his name. He was aware of the voices. They're using the pronoun he. He paid no attention. Once again, they're using the pronoun he. So that is what makes it third person narration. So what you could do is you could just go ahead and you could fill in third person narration under number 4. Right. And now, and after we were done with the overview and the types of narration, we moved on to look at our character sketches and our themes that you had written in your literature books. So we looked at our characters, David and the man. So when we look at David, we described him as being a 12-year-old boy who was quite skinny but strong. And when we said strong, we said both mentally and physically strong. Physically strong because he ran for many kilometers and months and days on end, and mentally strong because he was able to survive for a really long time on his own out there in the world. Not in a home, not with people he loved and trusted, but just, out there. We also looked at David as being mature. He was a 12-year-old boy and he escaped the camp and he was brave while doing it. He did it and he was able to survive. We looked at him as being paranoid. If you look at chapter 1, when he goes to find his bundle, he thinks it's a bomb and he starts to overthink the situation. And so he's quite paranoid. He keeps thinking, I'm going to get caught. Oh, people are watching me. We hear this a lot. It's part of his character, it's part of his personality. And then we looked at David as being intelligent. He is a 12-year-old boy, and there are a few things he doesn't know, but wow, he was able to pick up on things quickly, and he was able to figure things out and get himself out of some really tricky situations here and there. So he was rather intelligent, smart. And then we went on to look at the man, but before we started describing him, spoke about how it's very important to note that everything we know about the man is secondhand information. It's coming from another character in the novel. Everything we know about the man, because we put his name in inverted commas, is what David thinks of him or how David sees him. So first things first, we know for sure the man is a guard in the camp, right? And then we understand that David describes him in a certain way. And David says that he has a fat, gross face, small, repulsive eyes, and eyes that never change their expression. So they're expressionless. They're cold, or they're hard, or they're not expressive. And then we can go on to say how we saw the man. So when you're reading, you're realizing the man can't be all bad because he helps David to escape. So he must have some sort of sympathy or compassion in him. We also can see that he pities David. He feels pity. He feels sorry for him living in this camp, and he helps him to escape. So that is how we see the man. And then we moved on to themes where we described our themes. And as I said earlier, we spoke about survival, freedom, religion. We also brought up war because the people in a concentration camp are prisoners of war. So they're experiencing what it's like to be a part of that. There was also talk of emotions. So emotions play a large role in this novel because emotions, there's a constant change of emotions. David feels happy, and then all of a sudden he feels upset, and then he feels miserable, and he starts to doubt himself. So the emotions in the novel are clear, and they are a part of the novel, and they are something that runs from the very beginning of the novel. They are constantly building on one another. So that's our themes. And then that's about all we discussed. And we had a look at, in general, what this novel is about. So it was about a young boy stuck in a concentration camp who had to escape, and he traveled across Europe, and he faced many obstacles along his way, especially because he was so young. He's 12 and he's traveling alone. So this novel just might have been very long. Okay, I understand that. And compared to your novel you read last term, it was quite a different one. So I explained to the class that our author, Anne Holm, what she was doing was she was looking at it from how David would look at it. So if you think about David, he has lived his entire life, 12 years in the camp. And then for the very first time, he was out in the open. He was free. And what does he do? He goes ahead and he admires everything. And he starts getting obsessed with beauty, and he starts to become very detail-oriented. So what happens? He describes every tree. He describes every cloud. He describes the ocean and the mountains and the grass and all of that. Because he'd never seen it before. It was his first time. And because he never knew if he was going to go back into the camp. He never knew if he would see that ever again. So what he did is he was trying to take it all in. And so what our author did is she pushed all of that information, pushed it all in so that we could see what David was experiencing. Okay? And I know this book was a hard read because, wow, there were a lot of pages and there's a lot of detail. But that's why we have to spend time picking out all the important information, because otherwise we'll spend time discussing the trees and the sky and the flowers and the grass and everything else David experienced. But this was important to the novel. She did it for a reason. So hopefully now you can understand where exactly she was coming from. Right. So that's all from me, and I look forward to seeing you all in our very next video lesson. Bye.